You wake again with that same heaviness sitting inside your chest, a weight so familiar that you no longer remember the last morning you rose without it. And I want you, just for this moment, to let yourself feel it without turning away, without trying to be brave, without arranging your face into the expression the world once demanded from you. Yes, simply meet it as it is, this quiet, wordless fatigue that has followed you through so many seasons of your life. You have carried it for so long that part of you believes this heaviness is simply who you are. But listen, beneath the exhaustion, there is a deeper story, older than your days, older even than your mother's sorrow, a story that has curled itself into the fibers of your being. And it is that story which now begins to stir, ever so slightly, because you are finally able to bear hearing it. You tell me sometimes that you feel as though life has become too heavy, that even small tasks feel like lifting a stone, that your heart wakes as if it has already lived a whole day before the sun even rises. And you whisper, I am so tired of being strong. Let that sentence echo inside you. Do not rush past it. Strength has been your mask for so long that you no longer know the face behind it, but the psyche, your own self, has been knocking at the door of your awareness quietly, patiently, through this exhaustion. You see, fatigue of this kind is not weakness. It is often the soul refusing to cooperate with a life that has grown too narrow, too borrowed, too defined by what others needed from you. You have lived in the service of roles that once ensured your survival, the dependable one, the understanding one, the one who absorbs the unspoken burdens of those around you. And although these roles protected you long ago, they now press upon you like garments that no longer fit. Garments you continue wearing out of habit, out of loyalty, out of fear. There is a deeper truth, and it has been waiting for years to reach you. But first, breathe slowly down into your belly. Yes, allow the breath to settle like a stone sinking in clear water, and feel what remains in you when you stop holding everything together. You were born into a story already in motion, a drama that did not begin with your first breath. You entered a world shaped by your mother's unseen wounds, her silent longings, her unspoken grief, and before you could speak, before you could defend yourself, you learned to adapt to her inner landscape, to become the child she needed in order to bear her own life. You learned to disappear in order to be loved, to soften yourself to protect her fragility, to shine gently so as not to disturb the places where she could not see her own shadow. And so you learned early to become responsible for the moods, the storms, the emptiness of another, not because anyone told you to, but because the child senses instinctively that survival depends upon attunement, upon becoming whatever the mother requires. And you became it, faithfully, beautifully, tragically. You may wonder why the psyche brings this back to you now, why at this stage of life the old wound opens again And the answer is quiet, but firm, because the self no longer wishes to be divided, no longer wishes to remain buried beneath the expectations of others. The wound rises because you are finally strong enough to meet it, not through resistance, but through understanding. Let me speak plainly to you. The mother wound is not a moral accusation. It is not a judgment against the woman who gave you life. It is an archetypal rupture, a tear in the primordial bond that every soul must navigate. Your personal mother carried only a fragment of the Great Mother, and she, too, was shaped by forces that preceded her birth. Her limitations were not of her own design, yet they shaped you profoundly. They became the invisible architecture of your earliest identity. And now you feel the walls of that early architecture closing in, the air thinning, as though you cannot breathe deeply within the old patterns anymore. This is not imagination. This is the psyche preparing for a turning. Perhaps you have dreamt of an empty house, long corridors, many locked doors, perhaps a child wandering alone through its rooms, a child with your face, though younger than any memory. This dream, or one like it, belongs to many who carry the mother wound. It is the soul showing you how much of yourself remained uninhabited, unattended, untouched by warmth, because your early energy went outward, toward the mother, rather than inward, into your own foundations. And now, after so many years, the child returns, standing timidly in the threshold of consciousness, asking not for rescue, but for recognition. Stay with her. Let her presence soften you. She is not here to overwhelm you. She is here because you are finally able to see her without collapsing into her pain. You often tell yourself that you have survived much betrayal, abandonment, silence, unreciprocated devotion, and you have survived. But you survived by leaving yourself behind, piece by piece, year by year, until only a thin outline of your true being remained enough to function, not enough to flourish. And now, the outline is no longer acceptable to the self. It demands fullness, embodiment, a return. Notice the subtle bitterness that sometimes rises in your heart, the small, sharp edge of resentment, not directed merely at your mother, but at life itself, at the principle that seemed to demand your sacrifice. Do not push this away. Bitterness is often the first sign that something within you refuses to be erased any longer. Let yourself feel it. Let it breathe. It is not there to devour you. It is there to awaken you. You took on the role of rescuer long before you knew the word, the one who stabilizes others, who absorbs storms, who remains kind even in cruelty, who rescues even those who wound you, and when you could not save them, when their grief or madness or disappointment persisted, you believed you had failed, you believed you were inadequate, unworthy. This is the lie the wound taught you, not because anyone intended harm, but because the psychic atmosphere of your childhood did not allow you the luxury of simply being yourself. You had to earn your place through service, and so you became indispensable, until indispensability became a prison. Let me tell you something that may take time to trust. Your exhaustion is sacred. It is not a flaw. It is not a weakness. It is the psyche saying, enough, enough with roles that starve the soul, enough with carrying what was never yours, enough with confusing survival with authenticity. It's time. This tiredness is the first doorway to the self. If you can listen to it gently, without fear, without rushing to fix it. Now, breathe again, slowly. Let the breath fall into the places that feel tight, worn, hollow, and notice how the body softens when you stop fighting your own truth. You say sometimes that you feel you have been living on the surface of your existence, functioning, performing, achieving, even nurturing others, yet never quite arriving in the depths where your real life waits. This is a common experience in those who carry the mother wound. The inner world becomes a distant room, closed off, because the early years required your full attention to the outer world to maintain a fragile harmony. But harmony purchased through self-erasure cannot last. And now the deeper rooms of your soul begin to call you back. Perhaps you feel this as a subtle ache, a longing without name, a quiet grief that appears without warning. These are signs of returning life, not decay. You may remember dreams of rivers, dark water at night. You stand on the bank, knowing that crossing would change everything, and yet fear rises. Fear of losing what little stability you have left. But understand, the river is not there to drown you. It is the threshold between the role you inherited and the life that is truly yours. In the psyche, water is the realm of the unconscious. And when the unconscious calls you, it does so because it wishes to restore you, to return to you what was carried far below the surface. You may say, I do not know who I am without my suffering, without the responsibilities I carry, without the identity shaped by the wound. Infinite, that is natural. Identity formed in childhood becomes a second skin, even if it restricts your breathing, even if it cuts into your flesh. We cling to it because we fear the nakedness beneath. But listen, below the roles, below the wound, below the exhaustion, there is a very small flame, quiet, almost forgotten, yet steady, a flame that whispers, I am still here. I have always been here. This is the self, not the ego that tries to control life, but the deeper center that longs to live you, the one that waited through every storm you endured. Let me guide you gently toward this flame. Close your eyes inwardly, not physically, but in the sense of turning your attention away from the external world for a moment. And notice the faintest glow beneath the layers of fatigue, the smallest warmth in the chest, the tiniest stirring in the belly. Do not force it. Simply allow yourself to sense that something still moves within you, even if you cannot yet name it. This is the beginning. The psyche does not demand dramatic transformations. It invites a slow return, a remembering, a quiet homecoming. When you stop carrying the world on your shoulders, even briefly, something astonishing occurs. You discover that the world does not collapse, but you begin to feel your own weight, your own presence, your own right to exist as you are. You have lived for so long in response to others, their needs, their wounds, their emptiness. And now For the first time in many years, the psyche asks you to turn toward yourself, to listen to your own hunger, your own longing, your own truth. There will be resistance, of course. You may hear an inner voice say, "This is selfish, dangerous, wrong." But remember, this voice is not conscience. It is conditioning, the echo of a childhood in which your worth was tied to self-sacrifice. Let it speak, and then let it pass, like an old wind moving through a house that no longer belongs to it. Stay with your breath, yes, gently. Feel it descend again, as though it carries the permission you were never given. Permission to exist without justification. Permission to rest without earning it. Permission to feel what you feel without apology. You may begin to sense a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, a loosening of something inside, as though the soul is stretching after a long sleep. Do not hurry it. The psyche unfolds at its own pace. You are not meant to rush through this. You are meant to feel the ground beneath you, the ground of your own being, and trust that it will hold you. This is the first movement of healing, not triumph, not clarity, simply the willingness to turn inward, to listen, to allow the forgotten parts of yourself to step forward, one hesitant breath at a time. And as you breathe, you may notice that the child wandering the empty house is no longer entirely alone. She senses your presence, your attention, and though she does not yet speak, her silence no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like waiting for you to follow her deeper into the rooms of your own soul, where the next truth is waiting, already awake. And as you take that first quiet step inward, following the faint presence of the child, something in the deeper layers of your psyche begins to stir, as though an old door, sealed for decades, has finally remembered the shape of its hinges, and you sense, without knowing how you know, that what awaits you beyond it is not destruction, but truth. There is a moment, often subtle, when you begin to notice patterns you once thought were accidents of fate, patterns in relationships, in disappointments, in the people you choose, the roles you assume, the burdens you pick up before anyone asks. And these repetitions are not coincidences. They are the echoes of a wound trying to speak to you through the architecture of your life. Do not turn away from this recognition. It is the threshold through which you must pass. You may feel anger rising, a quiet, simmering anger that you have tried to hide from yourself, anger that you were never allowed to have, because the image of the good one, the accommodating one, did not permit such emotions. But this anger is not evil. It is simply the life force that went underground when you had to be harmless in order to be loved. Let it breathe, just a little. This is how the shadow begins to appear, not as a monstrous figure, but as the returning pulse of your own vitality. Perhaps you have dreamt recently of rooms you never enter, or of mirrors that do not show your reflection, or of wandering through a garden that has grown wild, tangled, strangely beautiful. These dreams come to many who carry the mother wound. The neglected garden is not a symbol of failure. It is the place where your unexpressed feelings took refuge, where everything you suppressed in order to survive has continued to grow in the dark. Sit with that image. Notice how the wildness of the garden has its own beauty, its own order, a secret, instinctive intelligence that did not need your permission to live. This is the shadow in its true form, not an enemy, not a devil, but the repository of all you exiled from consciousness in order to maintain the fragile attachments of childhood. You were taught silently, through atmosphere, that your worth depended on managing the emotional climate around you, your mother's sadness, her volatility, her silence, her longing. You felt these currents long before you had language for them, and in your small body you made the impossible vow, I will make it better. I will keep the peace. I will carry what she cannot carry. And you did. You became the container for her unspoken grief. And in doing so, you pushed your own feelings into the shadow, where they waited patiently, sometimes for decades. Now, these feelings begin to emerge, and you may feel fear, as though you are opening a box whose contents could overwhelm you. But listen, the shadow never erupts without purpose. It appears only when the ego is strong enough to bear its counterpart, and you are stronger now than you believe. Let your breath descend again. Yes, deeper. The shadow is not here to punish you, it is here to restore you. You might recall a dream, a wolf standing at the edge of a forest, its eyes fixed on you, unblinking, not attacking, simply watching. Most would fear such a dream, but in the languages of the psyche, the wolf is not merely danger, it is instinct returning, authenticity returning, the part of you that refuses to remain domesticated by old roles. Do you feel a small tremor inside as you hear this? That tremor is recognition. Your life has been shaped by two currents, the longing to be seen and the fear of being seen too clearly. For if you were truly seen, your hidden anger, your unmet needs, your hunger for acknowledgement might reveal themselves, and you learned early that such revelations were dangerous, so you hid them behind kindness, behind competence, behind an almost supernatural intuition for the pain of others. But the psyche knows when its own truth has been denied for too long, and it begins to send dreams, symbols, synchronicities, until you turn and look. Now, gently turn. Look at the anger you fear is unacceptable. Look at the loneliness that followed you through every decade of your life, even when surrounded by others. Look at the grief you never gave yourself permission to feel because you believed it would drown you. These are not enemies. These are emissaries of the shadow, returning with messages you need to hear. You may remember a dream of a statue, perhaps a woman carved of stone, perfect, unmoving, untouchable. So many who carry the mother wound dream such figures, the stone mother, idealized, unreachable, the mother you longed for and tried to protect from imperfection. Your devotion to this ideal may have prevented you from seeing the flesh and blood woman who could not give what she did not have. And now the statue begins to crack. A small fissure appears. Inside, there is not emptiness, but something living vulnerable, unfinished. Let the image unfold. Do not force meaning upon it. The psyche does not speak in conclusions, but in invitations. There is a temptation, when facing the mother wound, to swing between extremes, to idealize her completely, or to condemn her entirely. But both are illusions. The truth lives in the middle, where complexity breathes, where you can see her as a soul shaped by her own wound, her own fate, her own history of being unseen. And when you see this, not intellectually, but inwardly, something in your heart softens, not into sentimentality, but into clarity, a clarity that frees you from repeating her story. Breathe, yes, let it settle. You are not here to relive her burdens. You are here to recognize which burdens are yours and which belong to her line. The moment you whisper inwardly, "Mother, I release your fate back to you," something shifts, not because you cease to love her, but because you finally allow yourself to exist apart from her story. And this is where individuation begins. Let us go deeper. Consider the guilt that arises whenever you say no, as though declining a request, or setting a boundary, or choosing rest were an act of betrayal. This guilt is not moral, it is ancestral, it is woven from the fear that if you stop giving, you will no longer be loved. A fear that belonged not to the adult you are now, but to the child who once depended on conditional affection. Look at that guilt, hold it gently, ask it, whom are you trying to protect? And you may feel in your chest the small, trembling answer, the child who thought love could vanish at any moment. Place a hand inwardly upon that child, not to soothe her prematurely, but simply to acknowledge that she still lives in the pattern of your days. She has been directing your relationships, your choices, your sacrifices, without your conscious knowledge. And now she turns her face toward you, not accusing you, not demanding, simply asking to be seen. Stay with her. Let us return to the dream of the garden, imagining yourself stepping into its wildness, hearing the rustle of leaves, the breath of wind, the pulse of something untamed. This garden is not chaos. It is the shadow's memory of what you once were before adaptation, before obedience, before you trimmed yourself to fit the shape of another's need. Walk a little farther into this image. You may find an old mandala forming there, perhaps circles of stones, or flowers arranged in patterns you did not consciously design. Mandala dreams appear when the psyche is attempting to restore inner balance, when something lost is returning to the center, even in the midst of turmoil. The mandala announces an inner order trying to be born. Look closely. In many such dreams, one section of the mandala is darkened, incomplete, empty. This is the quadrant of the mother complex, the place where nourishment should have flowed freely. but instead became tangled in duty, sorrow, or silence. And now the psyche urges you to complete it, not by repairing the past, but by reclaiming the life force you exiled in order to protect it. This is why the shadow appears with such intensity at this stage. It guards the life you abandoned, the feelings you denied, the instincts you suppressed. The shadow is not here to punish you. It has been carrying your unlived life, waiting for the moment you could return to it without fear of collapsing back into childhood. Let your breath slow again. Let it reach the lower belly. Feel the tremor. Yes, that one. It is the sign that you are entering a deeper stratum. You may feel afraid that if you open these doors fully, you will be overwhelmed by resentment toward your mother. But resentment is not the end point. It is the bridge. Across it lies the capacity to see her as human, finite, wounded, a carrier of patterns she did not understand. Only from this clarity can compassion, true compassion, not self-erasure, flow. Notice, too, the patterns in your relationships, how often you choose those who mirror her absence, her unpredictability, her neediness, how you feel compelled to heal them, support them, decipher their moods. These repetitions are not failures. They are unconscious attempts to resolve the wound by reenacting it. But you cannot heal the mother by healing her substitutes. And you cannot heal yourself by saving others. Now, breathe into this insight. It may feel sharp at first, like a blade cutting away illusion, but beneath it, you will sense a widening space, a space where your own life begins to form. Let the shadow come closer, not as a threat, but as a companion carrying truth, truth about your forgotten desires, your silenced anger, your buried gifts, your authentic voice. The shadow says, I have kept these safe for you while you survived. Ispan. And when you hear this, even faintly, something within you loosens, as though chains you wore for so long have begun to rust and fall away. This is the moment when you begin to separate what is your mother's from what is yours, her grief from your grief, her fate from your path, her emptiness from your longing. It is not done through force, but through a gradual deepening of awareness, through dreams, symbols, breaths, insights that descend when you least expect them. Now, place your attention gently on the center of your chest. Feel the quiet circle turning there, slow, deliberate. This is the self beginning to rearrange the architecture of your inner world. It does not shout, it does not command, it simply draws you to a truth with a magnetic softness. You may feel an inner threshold approaching, a place where the shadow no longer appears as darkness, but as invitation, where the mother complex shifts from prison to doorway, where the garden, once overgrown, begins to reveal its hidden paths. Let this awareness settle into you, not to conclude anything, but to prepare you for the deeper descent that now begins. For the psyche is leading you toward a truth the ego has long feared, a truth that will ask you to lay down the role of savior and step into the quiet, trembling possibility of being yourself. And as you stand before that inner threshold where the shadow no longer frightens you, but quietly asks to be acknowledged. There comes a moment, subtle at first, when something inside begins to loosen, a faint cracking, like ice shifting under winter light, and you sense that the identity you have worn for so many years is no longer able to contain the depth of what now wishes to emerge. Let yourself notice this, not with panic, not with resistance. Simply notice how the old ego, the one you built out of necessity, begins to feel thin, transparent, almost ghost-like. You have carried this ego as though your survival depended on it, and long ago it did. But now the psyche asks you to see that it is only a shell, a protective casing that once served you, but cannot accompany you where you are going. The first sign of its dissolution often arrives through fatigue, a weariness so profound that even the old strategies, pleasing, rescuing, anticipating the needs of others, no longer function. You try to be the strong one, the wise one, the reliable caretaker. But the soul refuses to animate these roles any longer, and the ego, deprived of its usual fuel, begins to collapse under its own weight. Let the collapse happen. Let it come without judgment. An ego that has outlived its purpose must undergo its own kind of death, a quiet burning away, not as punishment, but as liberation. You may experience this as disorientation, a sense that the person you have always been is fading, not in a frightening way, but as though you are watching the last embers of an old fire turning to ash. All your habitual responses, self-sacrifice, responsibility, hyper-attunement to others grow dim, lose their force, and beneath them, something far older begins to breathe again. Perhaps you have dreamt of carrying a dying bird upon your chest, a creature fragile, gasping, growing heavier by the moment, and though it is clearly dying, you refuse to put it down. Many dream this dream when the ego is in its final phases of exhaustion. The bird is not a symbol of someone you must save. It is the symbol of the savior role itself, a role that once protected you from abandonment, but now acts as a burden that crushes your breath. Look at that image. Feel its truth. How many times in your life have you carried the emotions, regrets, disappointments of others as though they were your responsibility? How many times have you believed, if I do not hold everything together, everything will fall apart? This belief was once adaptive. It kept the inner world of your childhood from shattering. But now, in adulthood, it prevents the birth of the self. Let the bird rest. Let it return to the earth. Its death is not your failure, it is your freedom. As the savior role dies, you may feel grief, a strange, tender grief for an identity that once served you well. You may even feel naked, exposed, uncertain. For if you are no longer the one who rescues, who consoles, who shoulders the burdens of others, then who are you? Stay with this question. Do not rush to answer it. Identity born from the wound must dissolve before identity born from the self can appear. Now, breathe again deeply Let the breath descend into the hollow places. Allow the old ego to crumble without grasping for it. You are not losing yourself, you are losing the mask that hid you from yourself. The psyche often offers a symbolic image at this stage. You may find yourself in a dream or waking vision, standing among the ashes of a burned structure, perhaps a house, perhaps a field, perhaps a great tree that once sheltered your childhood. Nothing remains but ash, gray, silent, untouched by the wind. Do not fear this ash. Ash is the sacred residue of what has been relinquished. Ash is the testament that something has been completed. Stand in it, feel it beneath your feet, soft, powdery, strangely warm. It is the material out of which the next image will rise. For in many dreams, after the ash settles, a mandala begins to form, sometimes faint, like a circle etched by an unseen hand, sometimes radiant gold and red, shimmering as though lit from within. See if you can sense such a mandala now, not with your eyes, but with the inner vision that stirs when the ego falls silent. The mandala is the symbol of the self, the true center, the ordering principle of your psyche. It appears only when the old center has died, making space for the deeper one to emerge. Notice its colors: gold, the color of incorruptible essence; red, the color of life force returning. Together they form the pattern of rebirth, the first geometry of a new psychic order. Let yourself rest here, in the quiet presence of this mandala. It is not a conclusion, it is a beginning of an interior orientation that does not depend on the approval or stability of others. Now, turn your attention gently toward the mother archetype, not your personal mother, though her image will arise, but the archetypal mother, the vast, ancient, primordial matrix from which all life flows and into which all immature identities must eventually dissolve. You may feel her watching you, not with judgment, not with demand, but with a deep, inexorable knowledge. She has waited for this moment, the moment when the daughter stops carrying the burdens of generations and instead lays them down, one by one, upon the earth. You have carried not only your mother's sorrow, but the sorrow of her mother. And her mother before that, you have carried unwept tears, unspoken rage, unlived vitality, the whole lineage of women who were asked to silence themselves for the sake of survival. But now you stand at the edge of that long ancestral river, and the archetypal mother looks upon you with a grave tenderness. She does not ask you to save her. She does not ask you to continue the old burden. She asks you only to release what was never yours. Let your breath sink. Let it go lower into the pelvis, the womb space, the ground of your being. Feel the weight you carry physical, emotional, ancestral begin to shift. You may see yourself in imagination, holding a heavy vessel filled with the grief of generations. Feel how long you have held it, how your arms ache, how your spine bends under its weight. Now, imagine placing this vessel on the ground, not throwing it away, not smashing it, simply placing it back where it belongs, into the soil of the archetypal mother, who can transform it in ways no human ego can. This gesture may seem small, but internally, it marks the beginning of liberation. As you place the vessel down, you may feel a tremor, a quiver in the deepest layer of the psyche. For the first time, you realize that your worth does not depend on carrying the burdens of others. Your love does not depend on rescuing. Your identity does not depend on being indispensable. The ego protests, it whispers, "If I am not needed, then who will love me?" This is the last cry of the old self, the remnant of a child's fear. Let it speak, let it soften, let it fade into the background. Something else is rising now, not from the mind, but from the center, a new axis forming where the mandala glows. You may experience this as stillness, a silence that is not empty, a space opening in your chest where there was once only tension. This is the moment when the ego dies, not by violence, not by force, but by yielding to a greater truth, the truth that you were never meant to be the one who holds the world together. Let the old identity burn completely. Let it become ash. Watch as fragments of your former self, your pleasing, your caretaking, your vigilant attunement, lift like cinders into the air, carried away by a wind that feels strangely kind. You are not being erased. You are being unburdened. In some visions, this wind becomes a figure, perhaps a feminine figure, neither young nor old. Robed in shadow and light, she stands behind you, placing her hands lightly upon your shoulders, not to guide you, not to command you, but simply to witness your release. This is the archetypal mother in her transpersonal form, no longer the wounded mother of your childhood, but the great mother who knows the cycles of death and rebirth. Her presence does not bind you, it frees you. She sees you not as a child who must serve, but as a soul who must awaken. Stay here, feel her gaze. It contains no demand, no hunger, no disappointment, only recognition. And as she looks upon you, you may feel something long dormant stir within your belly, an ember, a spark, a memory of vitality untouched by obligation. Let this spark grow. Let it glow faintly in the darkness. It does not need to become a flame yet. Its task now is simply to remind you that beneath all the layers of service and sacrifice, your own life force still moves, quiet, steady, patient. Now imagine returning to the mandala, the gold and red threads weaving themselves into a circle. At the center, there is an opening, a small, luminous void. This is where the new organizing principle of your life will emerge. But for that emergence to take place, the ego must release its claim to be the center. You may feel resistance. The ego does not surrender easily. It has protected you for so long. You may even feel grief for it, gratitude for its service, sorrow for its passing. Let yourself feel all of this. These emotions are the rites of passage of the psyche. They are signs that you are prepared to live from a deeper axis. In the inner vision, the mandala begins to rotate. Slowly, deliberately, as it turns, the ashes beneath it lift and swirl, forming delicate patterns. The old and the new intermingle. The past dissolves into the present. The future remains unborn, but sensed. The ego watches this movement and feels itself growing lighter. It no longer clings. It no longer insists. It becomes, finally, ready to bow. And so, imagine yourself bowing inwardly, not to an external deity, but to the self within. This bow is the death of the false center. It is the surrender that allows life to reorganize around a truer core. You may feel a softening at the base of the spine, a loosening in the chest, a widening behind the forehead. These sensations are signs that the psychic center is shifting from performance to presence, from vigilance to groundedness, from rescuing others to inhabiting yourself. Let this new orientation settle. Let it descend like warm rain into the soil of your being. Do not rush it. Rebirth begins in darkness, in silence, in trust. And as the last remnants of the old ego drift away, as the savior role dissolves, as the ancestral burden slips from your shoulders, you may sense, just at the edge of awareness, the first quiet breath of something new beginning to rise. And as the last tremor of the old identity falls away, there is a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when you sense a new center gathering itself within you, not as an idea, not as a surge of will, but as a steady warmth, as though the ashes beneath your feet have begun to glow from within. Do not rush toward it. Simply allow it to rise slowly, like a dawn that does not need to be seen to be trusted. This is the territory of the self, the place where your life begins again, not as repetition, not as compensation for the past, but as an unfolding from the deepest layer of your being. You may feel it first as spaciousness, a softening in the chest, a loosening of the breath, as though something within you has finally unclenched after years of holding too tightly. Let this spaciousness expand. Let it seep into the places that once felt crowded with fear, guilt, and obligation. When the old ego dies, the psyche does not leave you empty. It fills you with a new orientation, a new gravity, a quiet gravitational pull toward authenticity, toward presence, toward your own inner truth. You may find yourself suddenly aware of your breath, of the subtle movements of your body, of the quiet intuition that begins to speak from beneath thought. This is not imagination. It is the self emerging. Many describe this stage as a soft light, not bright, not overwhelming, but steady, a golden radiance that seems to come from inside the chest, or perhaps from behind the heart. This light is not symbolic, it is experiential. It is the psyche reclaiming its own luminosity after years of dimming itself for the sake of others. Breathe into this light, yes, gently. Let it fill the hollows where exhaustion once lived. Let it move into the places that felt abandoned. Allow it to warm the corners of your inner house, the rooms that were left unattended for decades. You may feel a tenderness rising, a tenderness toward yourself, towards the child you once were, towards the woman you have become, despite all the burdens you carried. This tenderness is the first language of the self. Now, if you allow your inner gaze to turn downward, you may see the ashes of the ego still gathered around your feet, gray, soft, without weight, and from the center of these ashes, a symbol begins to rise, a mandala, gold and red, its form more radiant than before. This mandala is not a vision you impose. It is the form your psyche takes when it begins to heal. It is the architecture of wholeness, quietly building itself beneath the threshold of consciousness. Let it form, let it rotate, let it find its own rhythm. You do not need to control it. You only need to witness. Within the mandala, you may sense the living pulse of something ancient, something wise, something that has been waiting for the moment when you would finally be able to receive it. This is the center you lost long ago, the center you abandoned in order to survive. And now it returns without reproach, without haste, simply because the path is clear again. You may feel as though you are being rearranged from within, not dramatically, but subtly. Old tensions soften, old fears loosen, old narratives lose their grip. The psyche is reorganizing itself around the self rather than around the wound. Let this reorganization happen. You do not need to understand it. Healing does not require comprehension, only openness. Now, I want you to imagine the archetypal mother once more, not the personal mother whose wounds echoed through your childhood, but the vast, primordial mother, the one who holds the collective memory of all life. She stands now not as burden, not as demand, but as presence. She watches as the lineage of sorrow that once flowed through you comes to rest at your feet. She watches as you step out of the ancestral river and onto solid ground. Her gaze is no longer heavy. It is spacious. It blesses your separation. For she knows that no soul can return to itself while carrying the unfinished stories of generations. Let her presence surround you, not to bind you, but to release you. Let her look upon you without expectation. Let her acknowledge the courage it took for you to set the vessel down, and let her turn quietly back into the mythic depths where she belongs. She does not leave you, but she no longer demands anything from you. This is the freedom you were always meant to experience. Breathe again. Feel how the breath moves differently now. Slower, deeper, more grounded, as though your body finally trusts the ground beneath it. You may begin to notice something extraordinary. The silence within you is no longer empty. It is filled with presence, a presence that feels both intimate and vast. This presence is the self. It does not command, it does not persuade, it simply is, and in its being, it invites you to be. Stay with this. Let the silence deepen. Let it hold you like a gentle embrace. You have spent so many years listening outward, attuning to others, absorbing their moods, deciphering their needs. Now you are listening inward, and what you hear is your own life speaking at last. In this silence, You may feel a warmth spreading from the center of your chest outward, like a small sun rising behind the ribs. Its light does not rush, it expands naturally. This is the return of vitality, not as urgency, but as quiet sufficiency. It is here, in this warmth, that the self begins to reveal its qualities: clarity without harshness, strength without aggression, compassion without self-sacrifice, presence without performance. You may find yourself standing differently within your own life, not bracing, not anticipating, simply being. You may notice that you no longer rush to rescue others, not because you are indifferent, but because you trust that each soul carries its own path, its own necessity. You offer presence, not rescue. You offer truth, not compliance. You offer boundaries, not self-erasure. This is what it means to live from the self. Let the mandala in your inner vision rotate once more. Observe how the ashes swirl gently around it, not as remnants of destruction, but as nutrients. The ashes of the ego become the soil of transformation. Nothing is wasted in the psyche. Everything becomes material for growth. Now, allow yourself to sense the possibility of peace, not the peace that comes from calm circumstances, but the peace that arises from inner alignment, a peace that does not depend on others changing, a peace that does not require you to disappear, a peace that has been waiting for decades to reach you. Let this peace settle around you like a soft mantle. Let it drape across your shoulders. Let it warm your heart. Let it root itself in your belly. You do not need to hold it. It holds you. This is the homecoming. You may find tears rising, not tears of grief now, but tears of recognition, as though the deepest part of you is whispering, "Ah, you are finally here." Allow the tears to come. They are the water that seals the passage between the old life and the new. Now, sense how the self stands within you upright, calm, luminous. It does not strive, it simply radiates. It does not seek approval. It knows its own worth. It does not fear abandonment. It is never alone. This is your true center. From this center, forgiveness may arise not as an obligation, but as a natural movement of a healed psyche. Forgiveness for your mother, for her limitations, for her blindness. Forgiveness for yourself, for the years you lived in patterns that were not chosen but inherited. Forgiveness for the parts of you that stayed small out of necessity. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is the release of the inner knot that kept you bound to the wound. Let that knot loosen. Let it unravel. Feel how your chest expands when it does. Now, imagine the mandala completing its rotation. A full circle, luminous, steady, whole. The gold brightens, the red deepens, and at its center, a quiet light pulses, gentle, rhythmic, like a second heartbeat. Stand before it. Let its symmetry reorder your inner world. Let its colors seep into your being. Let its presence remind you that you belong to yourself fully, finally. Your breath is slower now, your mind quieter, your heart anchored This is the self. This is the place you have been journeying towards through every grief, every shadow, every unraveling. This is the ground upon which your next life will stand. Stay here a moment longer. Feel the mandalas glow. Feel the silence deepen. Feel the new center holding you with an ease you once believed impossible. And now, when you are ready, let these words settle into the very root of your being. And now the circle is complete. The mandala has closed gently. You may slowly open your eyes when you feel ready, or stay here in the warmth of the self a little longer. I am with you always in the silence that now holds everything.